Despite the black woman's dire warning, I slept through the whole night for the first time in nearly a week. Knowing she was watching over me imbued a sense of safety and comfort, something to the deep chagrin of my parents no one else had been able to provide since this whole ordeal started. The sleep was actually dreamless and restful. The only moment of discomfort was the space between waking up and opening my eyes. I felt certain my day would begin with the sight of my friend's mangled body. Thankfully, on this day, my worries were misplaced. She was standing over my bed, cast like a scarred shadow against the harsh white of the hospital wall. Her darkly beatific gaze followed even my smallest movements. She was always alert. When I smiled at her, I noticed how itchy my face was. The scratches from my fingernails were healing quickly, but the sensation of their mending wasn't pleasant. I pressed my fingertips against the scrapes. It helped a little. 5 minutes later, my parents came in the room and apologized for not being there when I woke up. They wanted to bring me breakfast that was better than what the hospital offered. They handed me a box that smelled phenomenal. When I opened it, I was greeted by pancakes and sausages and potatoes from the same diner Dad and I visited the day before. I devoured it all very quickly, while Mom discussed what my day would be like with Dr. Jessica. As it turned out, I'd be with her for a few hours. She looked at me and asked if I'd be comfortable with that. I said sure. Even at my young age, I was curious to know what was wrong with me. My mom did her best to convince me that nothing was wrong with me, I was just a little different. She said it wouldn't be like this forever. She promised me that things would go back to the way they used to be soon, and I liked hearing that. Once Mom was done talking to me, Dad and I took a shower. He hadn't taken one with me in a couple of years, and he just wanted to make sure I'd be okay in there with everything that was going on. And I didn't mind the comfort company. It felt nice to have him wash my hair again. To my surprise, the black woman didn't stay at the foot of my bed. She followed me into the shower and stood right in front of me. Dad spent most of his time passing in and out of her, totally oblivious to the third person in the stall. All the while, she watched every movement of my body with rapt intensity. Part of me felt that she needed to stay by me in case something bad happened. After what she'd told me the night before, I was happy for her to be there, not only for my protection, but for my dad's too. I noticed for the first time that I was close enough and in a room sufficiently bright enough to see between the black woman's legs. Last year, Mom sat down with me and we went through a book showing pictures of men and women while she explained what made us physically different. While my friend looked a little like the pictures I'd seen in the book or what I'd seen of Mom, it was different. Behind the hair were ghastly scars. They were different from the other ones on her body. With these, it almost looked like something had bitten huge chunks of flesh away. We got out of the shower, toweled off, and got dressed. My friend, who was never dressed, stood stociously nearby as Mom brushed my hair into a shape that would be somewhat presentable. A little while later, the four of us were walking down the hall into an elevator and on the way up to see Dr. Jessica. I was excited. My parents greeted Dr. Jessica, hugged me, and then left. I sat down in her sunny office on the biggest beanbag chair I'd ever seen. My friend was standing directly behind me. Dr. Jessica sat very close, maybe just a couple feet away, on her own beanbag. She handed me a grape lollipop that had a Tootsie Roll inside it. My eyes widened. So far, everything was going great. The doctor asked me how things were, like how I felt. I answered in youthful honesty. I mean, I'd been feeling pretty good since I woke up. Then she wanted to know if I'd seen anything else since I got to the hospital yesterday afternoon. When I told Dr. Jessica that the black woman was alive, she seemed very interested. She told me to describe her to her the best that I could. So I did. Much taller than Dad. So tall her thick, frizzy hair brushes against the ceiling. Naked all the time, too. And so dark. Almost impossible to see unless the light was on. And she's covered in what looks like cuts and scars and bites. The doctor wanted to know about my friend's injuries, like how they happened, where they were, what they looked like. And I was very clear with my description since I was able to turn around and look at her. Dr. Jessica appeared very concerned when I described the scarred bite marks disfiguring my friend's vulva. She asked me what caused the bites and why my friend had been bitten down there. Since I'd already talked about the writhing tubes of muscle that had bored through her body to cause the other scars, I'd mentioned to her that those things didn't have any teeth, so I replied that I didn't know, but they were definitely bites. I got closer to my friend and stared at her. There were lines that were created by what had to have been rows of tiny, terrifyingly sharp teeth that could be made out in each barely healed gouge. In my head, my friend spoke. "When you turn around, please don't be scared. It isn't strong enough yet." With galvanizing force that nearly knocked me off my beanbag chair, I whirled back around to face Dr. Jessica. When the doctor asked if I was all right, I stared at an area by the door. I did my absolute best to remain calm and inform Dr. Jessica that no, I didn't think I was okay. On the walls and the ceiling behind the doctor was something. It wasn't a person or an animal or a plant or even those bleeding fleshless serpents. I never thought I'd prefer seeing a writhing mass of those awful, murderous coils instead of what I was seeing, but this time, I did. My mind was filled with the voice of the black woman telling me that we were safe. It's all that kept me from screaming. My voice shook as I told Dr. Jessica about the monster. It reminded me of a scab that grew on my kneecap once, back when I took a nasty spill when Dad was teaching me how to ride a two-wheeler. In the hours and days after that fall, the cut dried in patches of red and yellow and white. It itched. Yellowish lymphatic fluid dribbled out the side of the dried parts when I scratched too hard. Well, the atrocity by that door looked like that scab, only without the dry incrustations. This thing was wet and thick. The cheery sunlight pouring through the large windows cast its ray on the thing, causing it to glisten and reflect the sickening amorphous patches of pink light onto the white walls around it. It moved, or rather oozed, outward in all directions. I was vaguely reminded of the underside of my tongue, slick, veiny, and muscular. I nervously glanced back at Dr. Jessica and described what I was seeing. She was writing furiously in her yellow notebook. Only when I let out a gasp did she look up. There were pulsating slits of swollen flesh split open over the entire surface of the creature. From the slits came thin tubes that reminded me of skinny versions of the serpentine coils from the other days. But these had round, bulbous tips on their front end. They looked like the eye stalk snails have, only veiny and muscular and dribbling blood and other unnameable fluids. They extended further and further away from the main body, slithering around the room and twisting through the air. One slid through the back of Dr. Jessica's head and exited via her mouth. I told her what was happening. She asked me something, her voice unobstructed by the ghostly flesh impaling her skull. I didn't answer. While she spoke, the thick head of flesh capping the end of the tendril opened to reveal countless rows of tiny, impossibly sharp spikes. More and more of them gathered around me, all flowering open to threaten with their translucent yellow teeth. I started to cry as I realized I wet my pants. The toothed bulbs leapt towards me and I fell backwards over the bean chair in terror. I landed on my back between the feet of the black woman. She stared down with her confident glare. "It's gone," she informed me. Dr. Jessica was on her feet helping me within seconds of my fall. And my friend was right. That thing had disappeared. The doctor hugged me, put her hands on my shoulders, looked into my eyes, and said she'd page my parents to bring me back to my room. She told me it was okay to end early on the first session. She said she was proud of the great work I'd done. I concentrated on her mouth as it formed her words. A ring of angry, chapped skin had developed around her lips. It wasn't there when our session started. I pictured that fat-headed tendril pushing through her mouth. She'd been hurt. The speed of my breathing increased as I pointed at the injury. She looked puzzled as she traced the cracked, desiccated flesh with the tip of her finger and winced when the left corner split and produced a droplet of blood. The look of confusion only lasted a moment. She tried to reassure me by saying it had been like that all day. All the talking must have worn away her makeup, or she'd rubbed it away with her hand. She tousled my hair and hid my stained pants with an apron used by other kids who'd painted during their own therapy sessions. My parents came in a few moments after Dr. Jessica went out to tell them that our session had finished. The four of us walked back to my hospital room. I couldn't stop thinking about Dr. Jessica's mouth. On the way, I saw wriggling tubes of muscle dangling from the ceiling. Again, the black woman let me know that I was okay. She strode with authority down the whole hallway, never once leaving my side. As we passed the creatures, they decayed into smoldering ashes. When I smiled, my dad noticed. He asked if I felt better. I told him I did. Mom let me know I'd be starting some new type of medicine with my dinner later that day. My smile broadened. I figured between my friend and the medicine, things were going to go back to normal. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about what the black woman told me the night before. This will get much, much worse for you soon. The grin faded from my face as the density of the creatures increased and the black woman wasn't burning them all. Maybe she couldn't. But maybe she didn't need to. I forced my young self to believe that things were moving in a positive direction. As we walked by a reception area riddled with intestinal endpoints gouting thick, bloody foam into pustulant craters on the floor, my friend reached down and held my hand. I was overcome with surprise and joy. I could finally touch her. Her palm was warm and muscular. Safe, so safe. My dad saw my hand reaching upwards and took it in his own. I was absolutely beaming. My dad smiled to himself in contentment. He'd been waiting days to feel like he could comfort me. Mom and Dad looked on as I swallowed a small beige pill with a gulp of orange juice. I was told not to expect the effects of the medication to be noticed for a week or two. Hearing that disappointed me a little. I was hoping this to all end right away as soon as the pill disappeared down my throat. We watched 101 Dalmatians on the little hospital TV while we ate some freezer-burned ice cream. After that, Mom kissed me goodbye and told me that Dad would be staying with me for the night. She needed to go to work early the next morning, and he didn't. When Mom left, Dad took a quick shower, donned his flannel bathrobe, and sat down in the chair next to my bed. We started to watch The Happiest Millionaire, but he was snoring within 10 minutes, and an hour later, I was asleep too. But late that night, I was startled awake by an odd whimpering sound. I opened my eyes and looked over the right side of my bed. My friend was standing there like an obsidian pillar, her gaze directed not at me, but in the direction of where my father was sleeping. Her bituminous flesh was being touched by a faint dark red light. The whimpering sound persisted. I turned around, dragging my heavy, exhausted face over the pillow and saw my dad, still sitting in his chair, breathing heavily. As my eyes acclimated to the dim light, I was able to see the black woman in greater detail. My dad was sweating buckets. I could see it pouring down his forehead, over his closed eyes, and down his lips and neck. His bathrobe began to shift. He hadn't stirred or moved at all aside from the heaving motion of his chest as he breathed. I watched as fine red lines dropped from somewhere above him and his robe opened fully. I snapped my head upward. Before a scream had completed its leap from my throat into the world, the black woman's hand was covering my mouth. I pulled and jerked, trying to do anything to get away or call for help, but she was impossibly strong. "Let it happen," she spoke directly into my mind. "And he won't be killed." Utterly helpless, I was forced to stare in silence, the only two sounds being my snorting, panicked breaths and my father's whimpering. Above my dad, extruding filaments of gossamer which pulsed with crimson bioluminescence, was a hole. It was a 6-foot sphere of blackness taking place of the air in the ceiling above him. And from that sphere grew glowing strings. The strings extended outwards and down, traveling over Dad's face, chest, mouth, and stomach, until they reached his groin. I stared as they began to slide, one by one, into his penis. The glow of the tendrils underwent a brief process of intensification as they pushed deeper into him. I nearly passed out when I saw his scrotum bulge as the tendrils moved inside, their glow illuminating the veins in his skin. Time passed with glacial speed as hundreds of the things with the combined diameter of a pencil invaded my father. Sickening undulations below his skin waxed and waned. The only consolation was that he didn't seem to be in pain. He continued to sweat and breathe heavily in sobbing heaves, but I was hoping in his mind that it was nothing more than a nightmare. I couldn't watch what they were doing to him any longer, and my friend was still holding me tightly, preventing me from moving or screaming. My eyes drifted toward the void from which the filaments came. Now fully acclimated to the dark room, I could see that the hole wasn't completely black. I was shocked to see that there were stars shining within it. The summer before all this happened, Dad and I spent many nights out in the backyard with the beautiful, expensive telescope that he'd won in a contest at work. As an astronomy buff, he was excited to point out all of the constellations and planets. He was so proud of me when I memorized every single one of them. But the weak glow of stars shining from within that void were parts of no constellation I'd ever seen. There didn't appear to be any discernible order to the pinpricks of light at all, aside from a few obvious binary and ternary systems. Not really knowing if it would work, I furiously thought, "I'm not going to scream or touch anything. I just want to see." The black woman loosened her grip. Her right hand remained wrapped around my wrist, not entirely trusting me, but willing to give me the benefit of the doubt. I stood up on my bed and walked around, looking into the gulf of stars. From a vantage point at the foot of my bed, I saw what might have been a planet, but not one I'd ever seen in books or on that Carl Sagan show my dad liked to watch. Whatever it was terrified me. At one point in history, it might have been a normal sphere, but some colossal force had cleaved it into multiple, chaotic chunks that remained clustered together by its hideously powerful gravity well. Its surface was blanketed by what I could only describe as frozen, rotting flesh. It had grown like pustulant rime, first within the cracks between the largest chunks of rock, and then over the main cratered surfaces. In the craters, volcanoes ejaculated jets of putrid-looking yellow gas which quickly coalesced and froze into pebbles, which rained down on the ground floor below. My body was held and my mouth again was covered. Pain radiated through my shoulder like I'd been stabbed. As I tried to scream under the black hand, I felt her other one grab my shoulder and push it forward and up. I felt a pop and the pain quickly diminished. A dull ache replaced the sensation, but my attention shifted to my father. The things were leaving him. One by one, they extricated themselves from his anatomy and slithered their way back into the void from which they came. Once the last one had disappeared, the void collapsed on itself, leaving a tiny singularity of bright light before blinking out. The dark hospital room went back to normal again, and my friend let me go. Dad woke with a gasp and twisted his head back and forth, as if he was looking for the assailants from his nightmare. He caught me staring at him and forced a calm smile. He glanced down and realized his robe was open. "Whoops," he said, covering up. "Sorry you had to wake up to that." He got up from the chair and walked over to the bathroom. As he relieved himself, I could hear him making pained grunting sounds. He flushed, washed his hands, and came over to me. "Remind me to ask your mom to pick up some cranberry juice tomorrow," he told me. He kissed my forehead and sat back down. We turned on the TV and watched some old cowboy movie from when he was a kid. He fell back asleep with very little effort. I locked eyes with the Stygian eyes of my friend. "You gotta tell me what's gonna happen," I thought at her. "I will, but only in pieces small enough for you to digest," she replied. "And starting now, you have to ignore everything that only you can see. Even you?" My question felt hollow and pained. I couldn't stand to act like my friend and protector wasn't actually there. But I knew she had to have a point. I couldn't keep talking about crazy, impossible creatures. "Including me," came the answer. For another 9 months, while I sat trying to figure out what could happen in that period of time, she interrupted my thought process. "As I told you, things will get worse. Events beyond any comprehensible level of evil will take place, and even as they do, you have to stay silent." And with that, she was gone. It was only then did my scream peal throughout the room, rousing my father and causing the nurse to rush in. When they begged me to tell them what was wrong, all I could do was apologize.
Hey there, everyone who's listening on YouTube, or those of you who are listening on the podcast. It's me, MrCreepyPasta, and before you head out for the night, I just wanted to let you know about a couple of things. Without you, the show doesn't take place. So, if you guys would like to support the show, or if you guys would like to get your hands on a couple of cool little things whenever new things come out, check out patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta, and any support that you guys show, I really appreciate. So everyone who's already donated to the Patreon, I really appreciate it. You guys are amazing. And thank you so much for that. If you guys are looking for more Creepypasta Storytime, there's a new video that's uploaded to this channel or uploaded to the podcast every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday now. You can be able to get more from me at facebook.com/MrCreepyPasta or on Twitter at MrCreepyPasta and then the number 0. Thanks so much for listening, kids, and for your support. And sweet dreams.